Welcome
Welcome
to
Ask
Ask
a
a
Lawyer
Lawyer
Over
Over
a
a
Beer.
Beer.
Hi, I'm Louise Fiore.
And I'm Ina Shapovalov,
We're two attorneys who know that legal talk can be stressful.
but it doesn't have to be.
That's why we're grabbing a beer, we're kicking back, and just having real conversations about immigration and business law.
No fancy words, no pressure, just a relaxed space to talk about the things that matter most to you.
Beer was brought to the US by immigrants, just like many new businesses, great ideas, and traditions.
In the spirit of making things a little bit easier,
Keep calm.
take a sip
Let's talk law.
without the stress.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Today, we're going to be talking about how to avoid Trump's tariffs and kind of provide a guide for foreigners doing business in the US. Ina, that's kind of your specialty. When I first started working with you, it was very much the corporate immigration, which I learned so much from you. So, why don't you kind of start us out? What are the tariffs? Let's start there.
Right. Right. So tariffs are otherwise known as duties. When you import something into the United States, when you bring something from another country to here,
Like this beer, which is from
right.
Spain.
And unlike this beer, which is called Single in Havana, but is actually from the United States. But let's say the maker of your beer
Estrella.
wanted to, well, they brought that in. So as it's coming into the country, the United States has a right to impose taxes or duties on it. So let's say that beer maybe costs $1. And when it's brought into the United States, the state says, well, yeah, but you need to pay us, Estrella beer maker, a little bit of extra, let's say 10%. So then for every bottle of beer that they bring in, they have to give 10% or 10 cents to the United States. So that's what tariffs are.
And how does the tariffs that Trump has imposed onto foreign entities affect the pricing and the business of foreign entities coming into the US?
Right. So, we've actually always had tariffs on a lot of goods. The question is just about percentages. So, if the government imposes like 100% tariff on something, so that $1 bottle suddenly becomes a $2 bottle because the maker, the manufacturer has to pay that extra dollar to the US government. So now instead of selling it for $1, they have to sell it for $2 to recuperate the cost. So basically, tariffs on imported goods raise prices.
Okay. So that's the general. Now going to the more specific, how does tariff affect US business? So let's just use, well, my background with real estate. Let's just say that we have a business that does home remodels and they're getting goods for flooring and kitchen countertops and things
Mhm.
like that, which are typically imported. How are the tariffs going to affect that specific business?
Sure. Well, let's say, for example, that that remodeling business is importing tiles from Spain. I love those, like Spanish tiles. Just like that Spanish beer you have. Let's say, and if they have to pay more for those tiles, then they have to up the cost of the remodel, and it becomes much more difficult to do that business.
Okay. So one of the strategies is to try to get as many, I would guess, and again, you're the guru on this topic, would be to try to find manufacturers and try to find goods within the US so you kind of get out of dealing with that tariff situation.
Exactly. Well, I mean, the first simple thing is imagine if you are the maker of that Spanish beer. Um, well, what if you actually made that beer in the United States? Then it would not be subject to tariff. Then you would be able to sell that beer for $1 instead of the two that you have to sell it for. So, of course, you're going to sell more beer. And that would be one strategy. If you're not the maker of the manufacturer, of that item that you're bringing in, then you need to think of where you're going to source those items that are otherwise expensive if they come from other countries. Can you find something that's made in the USA?
Okay, so let's stay there for a second. Walk me through how, because here's the thing. The way my mind automatically goes to, right, is this Spanish beer is theoretically probably not as easily manufactured in the US because it is a Spanish beer, correct?
Well, no, not necessarily, because here I am drinking a beer that's called Single in Havana, but this beer is not from Havana. This beer is manufactured in the United States. And actually, over the last number of years, like the beer brewing industry and the craft beer industry has just blossomed in the United States. So if you've ever been on a tour of a brewery, you see these big vats, and we've seen very many small breweries get their startups and start manufacturing beer. So actually, it's not that expensive and it's not that hard. Actually, they have like home beer brewing kits,
Oh yeah, I've seen
that,
those.
yeah, that you can like make your own beer at home. So it's that easy. So the only thing that's truly Spanish about that Spanish beer is the recipe. So, and I know some would say like the water changes the flavor or whatever, but um maybe there's a particular, or maybe they could rework that recipe here in the United States to be the same thing, and then just sell it in the US. In fact, there are a number of companies that manufacture in various countries, depending, like Coca-Cola. For example, Coca-Cola manufactures in the United States, but there's also Mexican Coke, if you guys
Yes.
know, or aficionado. Same Coca-Cola, they manufacture their same Coca-Cola products, but actually, the recipe in Mexico is a little bit different. They use cane sugar. It tastes a little bit different. Some Americans really like it. Um, and it's made more to like the local Mexican flavor, but essentially it's the same Coke. So they can totally do the same thing with beer.
I agree. And I think that so that kind of leads us into an interesting round, right?
Mhm.
Because I think that there is an argument to be made that there's a way to take advantage, not only just to avoid the tariffs, but also take advantage of the tariffs where you're touching a market that before you wouldn't touch, where it's almost like you have the Spanish beer. Hey, you can pay $2 and have the Spanish or yeah, the Spanish beer.
Mhm.
Or you can pay $1. It's not going to be exactly like the Spanish bear, but it's going to be a variation of that. And that in itself becomes the marketing strategy behind
The
it.
Spanish American beer.
Exactly. So and I think that can be used in a lot of different businesses as well, not just beer, but also when we think of well, as you know, I had done a whole gut job with my property. Huge gut job. I mean, the only thing that stayed was the roof. And when we were going through the process, that was one of the things that we talked about with our contractor in terms of like what flooring we were choosing and based on price point. And this was before the tariffs, but based on price points, we got a similar version, but it was a little bit cheaper. With the countertops, we got a more expensive version because I cook a lot and I was very particular with that. But there was options, right? And
Right.
depending on where it was being imported from, and again, this was before tariffs, so it's not a new concept. Different
Mhm.
different imports are going to have different pricings. But now with the tariffs, that in itself can be the marketing situation of like, hey, you can pay for this, but there's something similar that was manufactured here that doesn't have that tariff that you would be able to pay less for.
Right, exactly. So I think, if I'm in the shoes of a business that is outside the United States, but does a significant amount of import into the United States, I'm going to be rethinking, because suddenly my products have gotten more expensive in the US. So I'm going to be rethinking, like, what am I gonna do? What if can I make this product in the US and sell more of it? I mean, it's that simple. So obviously, cost of manufacturing has to be considered, but then you have cost of shipping plus cost of tariffs versus the cost of manufacturing. So depending on what kind of business it is, I think, a lot of things, like some of the highest tariffs right now, that Trump is imposing are on China. Why? Because China has an extremely low cost of manufacturing because they have a really low cost for labor. So there are people who are working for like pennies
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
per hour or whatever. Like, and so Chinese companies can manufacture, you know, any product pretty much way, way, way cheaper. But now once that product is brought here and have to pay to ship it, and if they have, 100% tariff, so that's double the price. So now you have to ask yourself, well, if I were a Chinese factory owner or anywhere else, can I do that in the United States? So maybe there are some things which really require a lot of human labor, which is expensive in the US because we have wage and hour laws. But maybe we can think about things that aren't so labor intensive. Maybe we can talk about the really huge growing field, which is AI.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there are a lot of I've seen there have been a lot of innovations in using AI to manufacture. So instead of having an assembly line with like a bunch of people there, each putting on a separate part, there's robots that do that. And maybe there's one person just overseeing the whole thing that makes it work. And that one person is a specialty engineer. And guess what? Chances are that with the right visa, you can bring that person from your home country
Oh,
to
yes.
oversee this AI robot manufacturing process that you can create.
So
Oh,
that I love that point because that I think opens the next thing that we need to be
mhm,
thinking about is if I'm a foreigner and I've done my cost benefit analysis and I've said, okay, the cost of manufacturing in my country
mhm,
plus the shipping plus the tariffs versus the cost of just opening a business here and maybe, like you said, transferring one person from my business in my home country into my business here to kind
mhm.
of oversee, I can maybe make it work. But again, then we open the door to what kind of visas are available. So let's do a hypothetical because you know how much I
Sure.
love my hypotheticals.
Sure.
So let's say that, let's use beer. So let's say that I'm in Spain
Mhm,
and I manufacture Estrella beer, and I say, okay, well, based on my calculations, it's getting a little too expensive for me to ship it here into the United States. I don't know that I'm going to be continuing to do
mhm,
that. And then you come to me and you're like, okay, well, there's another possibility. Here's the numbers. You might be able to manufacture in the US. It will be, like you said, a Spanish American version of
mhm.
Estrella. And now I say, okay, that's great, but I want my CEO to transfer over and kind of oversee this. He understands our original recipe. He'll be a good person to kind of play with that recipe based on what is available to us
Mhm.
in the United States. What, under that hypothetical, what would you say immediately off the top of your head? You're like, okay, these are the possible visas that I would go to.
Sure. So actually a couple because we're talking about Spain. So it's excuse me, as soon as we talk about a country that is well, Spain and the United States have a treaty, a commerce treaty. And under that commerce treaty, there's a particular type of investor visa that's permitted. So anytime that a person from another country who has a commerce treaty with the US wants to come and open a business in the US and invest in something in the US, they might be eligible for an E2 visa. That's an investor visa. That would allow the Spanish manufacturer to invest in a brewery here and bring in the investors under that visa, should the investor want to come here to manage the business. Or maybe under that E2 visa, they can bring in just the managers, or they can also bring in under the E2 visa technical personnel, like maybe the brewmaster. That would be one option that I would immediately think of because it's Spain.
Yes.
Another option, because you have a home business in another country and you're opening a, let's say, a branch or a subsidiary in the United States. So the minute you have a relationship between two businesses, um, with the right relationship and the right documentation, a CEO of a business, of the foreign business, can transfer to the United States. It's intra-company transferee under the L1 visa. So, and under the L1A, and then L1B allows you the same structure, corporate structure, to transfer specialists.
Yes. So Oh my God, I love L's and E's are like my favorite things. Although I don't do as much corporate immigration as you do, I do enjoy them
Mhm.
because I enjoy the business aspect of it. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong, but the L1A can be a pathway to LPR status, also known as getting your green card, but L1B typically is not.
Correct, correct. Because there is a category of permanent residence of immigrant visa, the EB1, which is based on the same intercompany transferee relationship. It's just that the company in the United States cannot be a new company. It has to have been, open and operating basically for at least 1 year. But once you have two companies, one in Spain in this case, one in the United States, open operating for at least 1 year, and you're transferring that manager over, that same manager is eligible for the EB1 green card, or immigrant visa, which is which can give you the green card, as well as being eligible for the L1. Now, L1A. Now, L1B is not manager, it's specialist, and there's no specialist equivalent under in that sense for the green card. So the specialist could still get a green card, but they would have to go through something like a perm labor certification process or something like that. We'd have to
It
look
is
to see.
doable. It's just it would be a different path.
And there's one more thing though. There's one more option that we look at, which is the extraordinary ability visa and green card, because there's
Yes.
EB1 green card for people who have extraordinary abilities, and also allows you to have a temporary visa, the O1, and under basically very similar criteria. If you are at the top of your field in your country, like let's say you're a brewmaster and you're like the best brewmaster in Spain, everybody goes to you. They've written articles about you. You've gotten awards. And like, this is the best brewmaster in Spain. If you want to brew beer in Spain, you go to this person. If you're that person, and you can show those awards, those articles, the fact that you've contributed to maybe an organization that has a really high level of respect in the area. If you are one of those a person like that, then you can get an O1 visa to work for the brewery here, and you can also apply for a green card through that path. And you know what? And we can mix and match.
Oh, wait, that I didn't know. So
Yeah,
let's hang out there
yeah.
for a little bit. What do you mean mix and match?
So let's say you come in on an E2 visa as a manager, and you never did the L1 visa, but now it's been at least a year and both companies are working, and you've got that dual company relationship that you need for the EB1 green card. You can apply for the EB1 green card even though you never had the L1 visa. You can just work on the E visa first.
Oh, that's okay. That makes sense.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
so that does make
Exactly.
sense.
Or you can have the O1 and then do EB1 based on the managerial relationship, or vice versa. It doesn't have to be, it's never
Clean.
like a ride from one visa to a green card based on the same category. There's nothing that allows you to like easily slide. You have to match categories. But if you match several categories, then you have to think about what particular one is more advantageous to your situation.
No, that makes perfect sense. And obviously, the more successful your business is, the I would think from a business aspect, because that's more my forte is the business formation. Um, the more, no, I don't want to say easier, but the clearer I think it would become what options you do have, because now you can see where the business is flourishing, where the business has a niche, and how you fit into that niche. And based on that, is it an O visa for extraordinary ability? And I think that kind of becomes more clear as the business develops.
Right. Yes, it does, but I think that's where the well-written business plan comes into action. Because I think that's something that you could also plan for, to allow your business to meet all of these, as many of these categories as possible. So, you should not be starting a business until you know kind of which way you're going, how are you going to
Yes,
develop
I
it?
100% agree with that. I tell many of my clients this, start as you mean to go. So whatever image you may have of the business today, write a business plan that accounts for its possible growth and different areas within that industry that you're going into where it can just naturally develop, right? I just worked on a business plan for a real estate investor, and when he came in, his plan was very clean. It was, I'm going to buy foreclosed houses, I'm going to fix them up, and I'm going to sell them. Or I'm going to Airbnb them if the market doesn't allow me to sell. But then as we were talking, I was like, okay, well, who's doing the construction? Who's pulling the permits? Do you have a construction team? Are you hiring another company to do the construction team? If you are putting these properties for sale, is it a real estate brokerage that you're doing an exclusive agreement with, or are you going to be the licensed broker? Turned out his wife was already a real estate broker. So it was going to be through his wife. He already had construction background, and he already had a construction general contracting company that he was going to be doing an exclusive contract with. So once I started putting those pieces together, I really wanted to create something that was a little bit bigger where he could potentially become a developer and not just I buy one house, I finish that project, I sell it out, and really allow the business to grow in terms of the way it was structured on its membership, the way it was structured with the managers and what the duties of those managers are going to be. So you almost have, the way I like to look at a business plan is you have your immediate plan, you have your 1 year plan, you have your 3 year plan, and you have your 5 year plan. And then you have your indefinite, more broader plan of catch all clauses, if you will, where as thing kind of unfolds, you're able to grab on those articles and still have it be for the purpose of what the LLC or the corporation was set up for.
Right. And actually, like for the E2 visa, you're required to submit a 5-year business plan with breakdowns for every year. So I find that, as a requirement, actually, that's great because it forces a lot of clients into thinking, oh, wait a minute, I think, a lot of people think they start a business and it's like, I start and then something happens and then boom, magically it just grows and expands.
Yes.
Like somebody snapped their finger or magic wand or something like that. But that E2 business plan with a breakdown for the 5 years makes them think, oh, how many people am I going to have at end of year 1, at the end of year 2, at the end of year 3? How many, how is that? How much money am I going to make? When do I break even? All the business plans have the break even points, but it's even more clear and it's more thought provoking when you take it out into 1 year increments all the way out to 5 years.
I agree with you. And I think, I mean, just in general, regardless of applying for a visa, I think all business owners and startups should think like that and should kind of like create that small plan, big plan mentality. But it almost becomes necessary, like you said, E2, you need to have it, but it also becomes necessary for phase 1 of getting the visa, but then phases moving forward in terms of changing visas for the purpose of getting LPR status and what that pathway is going to be. Because the last thing you want is to create this magnificent business that's doing really, really well. And the CEO, is like the primary driving force, and he or she has the great marketing ideas, and they're really getting with the community on developing your product and marketing, and everything's going great. And then the visa expires and you don't have a plan. And now the person that is really the driving force behind your business is not going to be here.
Right. And there's a couple of things that are important to plan at the beginning. So for visas and green cards, ownership structure is really important because you have to have it for the L1 visa and the EB1, the managerial transfers. You have to have a certain ownership. There's some options that you can have, but it's very important to have particular types of ownership. And also for the E2 visa, there are also ownership requirements because the country from which, the national of the country where the investment is coming from, that's making the investment, has to have
a treaty.
The country has to have a treaty, the person has to have that passport, and the company has to belong, at least has to be majority owned by people who are of that nationality from that country. So that Spanish beer company has to be owned mostly by Spaniards.
That makes sense. And I mean, here's the thing, again, outside of the immigration, the corporate immigration side, that's something I consistently tell my clients, right? There's a difference between voting members and membership rights in terms of like what you invested and what you get out of the company and how those gets broken up. And if you haven't really thought about it in the beginning, 9 out of 10 times, rather the company blows up or sinks, it's going to bite you. Rather, it's that the company blew up and the dude with 52% shares in terms of not voting rights, but just shares, like I'm entitled to 52% of net profits, but I only have 20% of votes. Well, now all of a sudden he's getting voted out, and it's in order to minimize his shares, it just becomes a mess. If the business goes well, it becomes a mess. If the business doesn't go well and it has liabilities, it becomes a mess. So the key really is on the corporate civil litigation side, which is the land I live in, and on the corporate immigration side, you should be always thinking about those things. You should be, whenever you're starting a business, you're thinking short term, long term, you're thinking who are the owners? What does ownership mean? Because in the legal
Right.
world, it can mean very different things. And even in the immigration law versus corporate law versus Florida civil litigation world, it can mean very different things. And what is a member versus a manager, and what do those terms mean? So it's important to already talk to an attorney from the get-go. So in my hypothetical, Estrella beer is now going to make Spanish American beer. They're calling an attorney and they're saying, hey, I have an idea. I did my cost benefit analysis. I think this idea could work. What are the next steps? And really have a deep consultation with the attorney of immigration consequences and immigration plans and what you want to get out of it from the immigration side, but then also from the corporate side. And what you're, because obviously every business owner is trying to be profitable.
Right. And actually, at the very beginning of, once you have your plan kind of how you want it to work, who you want, the immigration part is important for who do you want in your American business? Who do you want there working? Well, once you have that idea of plan, the next thing comes is that happens is people go for your choice of entity. And everybody goes, I want an LLC. Somebody told me online that LLC is the best. I don't have to pay taxes if I get an LLC. I want an
I
LLC.
love that one. I've heard that so many
Yeah.
times. Like LLC
Right.
is never pay taxes.
Right. No, that's not true.
No.
And depending on what your business is, right? How does that work? What is the difference? What are your options?
Oh,
business
okay.
strategy?
So the biggest options, obviously you have your S corp, which S corps are going to have the most tax benefit, in terms of your deductions, because when you file your business taxes, you're really filing it through your personal taxes. So they're lumped in together. So some of your personal deductions will go with your corporate deductions and vice versa. Because really what you're saying is my business is small and what my business is making, it's what I'm using to live, to survive. You typically in an S corp don't have multiple employees, you don't have a high payroll, you don't have, high expenses in the business itself and high revenues for the business itself. That one is going to also, in the legal world, have the worst repercussions in terms of liability. Because if your company gets sued, your personal assets are going to be in jeopardy within that lawsuit. So you'll get the most tax benefit, but you'll be more open to risk in terms of liability in case of a civil lawsuit.
But not everybody's eligible for an S corp, right?
Not everybody is eligible. LLCs, which is why they're so popular, LLCs are very easy to get, and everyone pretty much is eligible. Then the other one that I work a lot with is LLPs, limited liability partnerships.
That's used a lot in real estate, right?
It's used a lot in real estate, yes. It's also used a lot in consulting firms where you have other companies, like one company's coming in and they're focusing on the marketing One company's coming in is focusing on the HR, one company's coming in and focusing on the accounting. And together they're making one consulting firm where they go to small business or mid-level businesses and they basically consult them on how to run their business.
Gotcha.
They are going to, they're the most expensive to open, they're the most expensive to maintain. They are going to be the ones that are going to be the most protective in terms of you personally, in case that there is a civil lawsuit against the LLP. And it gets really a little convoluted, but also fun, where if you have, let's say, Ina LLC and Louise LLC own joint LLP, I'm in charge of the corporate structures. Clients hire us for corporate structure. She's in charge of immigration, corporate immigration side of it. I make a huge boo-boo and I start embezzling money for my clients. And I'm like, yeah, we're charging you $1 million to open your firm. And really, it only cost us $100. And then they sue the LLP. They can sue my individual LLC, and you are clean because you had nothing to do with it.
Okay.
So I like that one for complex businesses where it's like I trust you, but I don't trust you that much. That's really what an LLP is like I trust my partner, but I also don't want to have to babysit my partner. So let me create an LLP where if you go rogue, you're on your own.
Gotcha. So when you are coming into the United States and you're come up with your business plan and you want to open a company, so key takeaways, right? Talk to a corporate attorney to figure out, how to put your business plan legal structure together, but also a tax attorney, which is, or at least a tax specialist, which is also a little bit different because taxes are our whole other area. So very many corporate attorneys don't handle taxes, and tax attorneys are like a special beast. And then, of course, talk to an immigration attorneys, which is also very different from just sort of regular business law. So a lot of regular business lawyers know nothing about immigration because immigration and tax law have been found to be the two most complex areas of law in the United States.
Oh, yes,
So
100%.
that's why it makes sense that you would kind of need those three areas.
A lot of times, what I'm going to say is great on the corporate side. You're going to be like, no, don't do that on the corporate immigration side. So
and the tax guy is going to be like,
don't do any of this.
No.
So, and that's one of the things that is important to have a team that understands a little bit about the other person's area of law, but is also having a network where, I love the fact that I can call you and say, hey, Ina, I have a client that's starting this business. This is how I want to do it in my corporate law brain and civil litigation brain. And then you're able to say, okay, well, no, we can do it like that, but we got to tweak it a little bit so that it works for the corporate immigration side.
Right. A team that understands a little bit of the other side, but also a team that communicates well.
Yes.
Because I don't know how many times that's happened to me that I have a client go, oh yeah, I'll call my, other lawyer that specializes in some other area. And the other lawyer doesn't want to talk to me, does something, tells the client, oh yeah, this is the best way. And then that best way doesn't work for the client's immigration
side. That I've seen that a lot.
Right.
You and I have done a lot of RFEs, requests for evidence or notice of intent to deny, where the client kind of went where the team wasn't communicating and then came to us and was like, okay, what do we do here? And sometimes the answer is start fresh, start from scratch, and really restructure everything in a way that's going to marry corporate law, tax law, and corporate immigration. But all right, well,
so I want to talk about a couple little areas. I want to talk a little bit about some basic considerations in opening a business in the United States. But before I get into that, or before I ask you about that, I actually want to bring something else up regarding tariffs, because you were mentioning LLPs and said a lot of these are, consultancy businesses. So, and actually that's another way in which you can avoid tariffs, because guess what? At the moment, services are not subject to tariffs.
Yes.
So let's say you are an engineer, and we're like playing around with Spain now because of the bear. Let's say let's say you're the brewmaster in Spain and you offer consulting services on how to, create the best beer recipe, brewing methods, maybe engineer, I don't know. But something fancy that you know a lot about that nobody else knows about. And you would like to sell your brew like a true, Spanish brewmaster business in the United States, and you want to come and help out us. So if you are selling those consultancy services from Spain to the United States, and most of your clients are in the United States, you might be eligible for another visa, which is the E1, the treaty trader visa. And those services that you're selling, maybe you have a whole back office in Spain working, hard at providing those services. That bill that the American client pays you for your services. So that's duty free, at least at the moment. There's a little bit of talk of maybe taxing things, but
We
usually I
haven't
think
gotten there.
yeah, I think it's in the film industry where they're kind of talking about it. But in most other industries, I haven't really seen any movement towards taxing, and so that would not include duties. Of course, you still have to pay taxes on your income in the United States.
Well, but that's going to be true
But that's
regardless.
in any case, right,
Yeah.
right.
You're not going to get away from that, and you should
Right.
not try to get away from that. There's been plenty of people who have gotten in trouble about that. So
Right.
just
But
pay your taxes.
but American business taxes are actually some of the lowest in the world.
Yes. A lot of people don't realize this, by the way. I talk to a lot of obviously foreigners and Americans, and taxes in the United States are high, but when you talk to a lot of foreigners and you compare the percentage rate of what a business in Brazil or Switzerland or Italy or Turkey are paying, it's pretty low.
Right. And the other thing is, so advantages of having a business in the United States, but also things you should be thinking about are things like licensing requirements. Yeah, there are certain business activities that require a license. What else? Your general business license, right? But you know what? A lot of the licensing requirements in the United States are fairly easy to navigate, and there are a lot less like licensing fees and taxes here in the US than there are in many, many other countries. I've seen countries where like you lift a finger and you have to pay a licensing fee, tax, whatever, to the particular department of whatever it is. It's really not like that here.
No, and again, it will vary a little bit from state to state
And with the industry.
and with the industry, but I mean, Florida, for example, with construction licensing and real estate licensing, those fees are pretty manageable. And the continuing education that you have to take to continue having those licenses are also manageable. So it's not a huge fee as long as you plan accordingly and you plan correctly. And I think that's the other thing is speaking to someone who understands business and immigration at the same time to kind of figure out what licensing you could potentially need that you didn't even think you will need. I have had several clients come to me and essentially do real estate marketing without realizing that they need a real estate sales associate license. And they'll say, oh, well, we're just doing the marketing, but who owns those properties? Oh, my husband owns those properties. Are you getting a commission when you sell those properties? Well, I'm getting a marketing fee. Well, that's really a real estate commission. Just get your license. It's not a very difficult process. And once you have it, you are shielded from having any potential issues.
Right. Which brings me to another big option. This is like a pet subject of mine, is doing business in the United States and doing something that is unlicensed. Unlicensed practice of medicine, my favorite, unlicensed practice of law.
Yes.
Yeah, especially like medicine is a big one. People come in and say, oh, I am a doctor in my country. I would like to open a beauty business and, do like Botox shots or something. You need special licenses for it. There are certain medical licenses and particular ones depending on the services provided, and you need to figure out how that licensing scheme works, because in many times practicing certain fields without a license is a criminal act,
Yes,
right? And
yes.
they can fine you, send you to jail. And then of course, if you're an immigrant, then they can
Revoke your visa.
Revoke your visa, and you're gonna have to leave. So goodbye your business. So that's something that you should look into.
I mean, it goes back to what we said earlier. You sit down and really create a plan, and if you think you may need a license, find out how to get that license.
Right.
And most departments, when getting the licenses, they're upfront with you. They'll look at your business plan and they'll say, "Oh, actually, you don't need a license for this," or "You do need a license for this." But what you don't want to do is say, "Well, I'm not going to get the license. I'm going to see how it goes. I didn't see anything that specifically says Johnny needs a license, so Johnny doesn't need a license, and I'm going to see how it goes." And then you find out you did need a license, but you find out when you're charged with criminal charges for not having the license, and now your business goes bye-bye and your visa goes bye-bye.
Exactly. And what other things should people consider when opening a business? Licensing, location?
Yes, location is definitely one of them. I mean, again, my background is heavy on the real estate, and also consulting businesses, but really services, that's like my forte. And I remember when Fort Myers and Port St. Lucie, the real estate market started exploding, and a lot of people, I kept saying it for a while that I saw I was going to go there. A lot of people thought I was crazy, and then it happened. So it's also, when we say location, it's not where it's hot now, but where you can see a progression where you don't need to be the first one in, but you're seeing that, hey, my idea for a business is going to be popular here. Maybe not right now, but I can start setting the seeds and, really start planning slowly, because once that market hits in this area, I'm already in, I'm already know.
And that's why I think like a good marketing plan comes in really handy, because people sometimes will come in from another country and say, "Oh, people in my country love my product. I think I can sell it to everybody in the United States." But one thing that people don't realize is how diverse this country is. And people in Boston may not like your beer, but people in Florida might love it, or vice versa. So, the cultures are a little bit different. And the makeup of the people who live in certain areas, rural or urban or wherever you look, and different, like there are more Latinos in some areas, less in others. So the tastes may be different, right? And then the other thing that people don't realize is we have 50 states in this country. And if you're studying for your citizenship test, the 50 states are the same as the 50 stars on the flag. That's why we have 50 stars. Random fact. My point is that with 50 different states, each of the states has a different set of laws for corporate laws.
Yes.
Immigration is the same because that's federal. But if you want to open a corporation, an LLC, and you've chosen your location as a particular state, the law of that state is going to govern.
Change. And also, it goes back to licensing. You may not need a license for a particular business plan in one state, where in another state you do.
Correct.
So again, it's when you are thinking about the business, you're thinking about what is my overall, I always say micro macro vision, my small business plan, my large business plan. And then based on that, what is the location? What is the audience I'm trying to achieve? Is it more service based? Is it more goods based? Is it a mix of both? And then based on that, kind of starting to figure out, okay, well, do I need to be really thinking about Texas in terms of a corporate attorney, and then a federal immigration corporate attorney, and then federal and state tax attorney? And how that's going to play out. So all of those things are, it's not, here's the thing, and you said it in the beginning of this, no good business is born overnight. No good business is successful overnight. Most business owners understand this, where when you finally like hit big and everyone's like, "Oh my God, you're like a rising star overnight." They don't see all like the months and the years of like the planning and the thinking and the strategizing and the pivoting and the freaking out. Nobody sees that aspect of it. But that's really what it takes. Just from a corporate business owner success story, but also on the immigration component of how to make a foreign business migrate into the US and that be a success of its own.
Right, right. So I guess, to kind of wrap up, I think this is as good a time as any to start thinking about manufacturing in the United States. If you want to do business in the United States, manufacturing here or providing a service from your country that you're importing to the United States. And then the trick to it is research, 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 and plan, 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 and get the right counsel, the right
Yes.
team.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us and cheers.
Cheers.